Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you so much for tuning into the program. It's Thursday, May the 16th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, David Williams. He's produced the program. You'll be speaking with David when you pick up the phone to give us a shout to get in the queue and on the air. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial is 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. Well, to quote Brian Medore, the Jays blew it in the ninth. I don't know if you watched the Blue Jays. I'm wearing some Jays swag today. I'm not going to give up on my favorite baseball team, but man, are they frustrating to watch. There was a fella who used to call the show. This just popped in my head, Dave. Remember Austin, an older fella who loves the Orioles? Austin, if you're listening this morning, congratulations on yesterday's victory. And if you want to call and rub it in, you're more than welcome to do exactly that today. All right, Canada at the Men's World Hockey Championships. Got Norway today. Got a fright from Austria a couple of days ago. Hopefully that's a lesson learned. And checking in on the Canadian swimming trials for the participants in the upcoming Paris Olympics. Kylie Mass, one of our greats, she qualified for Paris. She's a 4-time Olympic medalist, so Kylie Mass in the 100-meter backstroke, she's going to Paris. Quick, interesting hockey note. It was on this date, 1976, in the Stanley Cup final at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Guy Lafleur and Pete Mahavlich each had a goal and 2 assists. The Habs beat the Flyers 5-3 for a 4-game sweep. What's interesting about the 76 finals is the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. And that year went to Flyers forward Reggie Leach. Leach scored 4 goals in the finals, has 19 goals in the playoffs itself, so he wins the Conn Smythe Trophy, even though the Flyers lost the cup. He's the only non-goaltender in NHL history to be named MVP of the playoffs in an unsuccessful cause, and the third of only 5 as of 2023. So Reggie Leach, Conn Smythe, but the Habs sweep the Flyers to win the cup. All right. So we all know, unfortunately, there's enough to worry about when our children arrive at school. And you've heard me ad nauseum talk about some of these issues, and I want to keep doing it. But it's on the way to and fro school. I mean, these stories are really quite something. So I can see Kenmount Terrace from my studio. And you would think that it's a nice self-contained subdivision, maybe even a sleepy subdivision. Not so much. So when people are trying to avoid Kelsey Drive and Kenmount Road, they're using Kenmount Terrace as a cut-through. So the problem then is that people are taping the instances where people are zipping by school buses and speeding all over Kenmount Terrace. I've seen some of the videos. It's really quite alarming. You don't know what you have to say to people to, get them to understand. When the school buses stop, then the lights are flashed and the stop sign is deployed. You have to stop. In both directions, you have to stop. But they're not doing it. At some point, the unfortunate reality is there's going to be someone hurt or killed. So they need some traffic calming measures in Kenmount Terrace, talking about a 3-way stop at one of the intersections. I think it's Kiwanis and Ladysmith Drive. But how often do we have to remind people? Nobody wants to wake up one morning and see a headline pop up on your social media feed or at vocm.com about a dead school child who just got off the bus, got mowed down by someone who's so idiotic and reckless and aggressive that they cannot stop when a school bus is stopped. So that's the story from Kenmount Terrace. And it's not just there. On Tuesday out in Conception Bay South, the RNC conducted one of their school zone monitoring programs, and in just that day alone, 32 speeding tickets in that single school zone. So I get it. Nobody wants to be preached at, but I just have these distinct worries about the kids out in their own school zones. So whether it be busing-related matters and or just generally speeding, and I guess it pops into my mind a lot because I live in a school neighborhood, and I see it all the time. Ennis Avenue is an absolute racetrack. And traffic calming, apparently there's got to be 25% of the 31 households in that area to vote in favor of moving forward with a study. At one point in the past, the city said it does not qualify for any of the speed curbing mechanisms that are utilized elsewhere. But anyway, you want to take it on, we can do it. And on that front, it'd be nice to get an update from the province about what this year's speed camera program will look like. And just for a reminder, last year in only 2 communities, Paradise and Mount Pearl, over the course of 3 months, just 3 months, 94,000 warnings were sent out. So hopefully we move from warnings to actual fines, and hopefully that's expanded to some of the most notable racetracks in and around this city and wherever else we're going to extend it across the island. Anyway, speed cameras. Sticking with schools for a second. So, Crystalline Howell, the Minister of Education, was a registered nurse before she got into politics. And she says it was her experience of what she saw and the stories she heard led to the decision to put naloxone kits in junior and senior high. I'm a little surprised we haven't had any conversation about this or any calls about that. I've talked about it a couple of times. It really does speak to a sad state of affairs, that children that young may indeed be or have fallen prey to opioids and maybe need to use a naloxone kit. Now, I suppose it's better to have it than to not. And there's got to be formal training for the staff to be able to apply it properly. It's not that complicated. You can look at little videos online. It's really not much to it, but we have to make sure we're doing it right. On top of that, I mean, this is a trend across the country, and we can point fingers of blame wherever. I choose to blame the people who are mixing these drugs with toxic substances, lethal substances, and of course they are everywhere, and they are relentless. And every time you pick up one, you bust a dealer and confiscate all the drugs and the guns and the money, the backfill is immediate. And the war on drugs has proven to be fruitless. Trillions of dollars out the door, and nothing's gotten better. In fact, it's gotten worse. What do we do? Not sure. But inside that group of ages 15 to 24, they're the fastest growing population requiring hospital care due to an overdose. So imagine naloxone kits in junior and senior high, anything inside the world of education. Let's talk about it. And I suppose this is somehow related in the world of early childhood education. So big announcement yesterday. And then, lo and behold, when we talk about daycare, $13.7 million over 4 years. Doesn't really sound like a whole lot of money. Now, of course, it is important to expand the number of daycare spots, early childhood education spots, and we can take it on whether it be for early childhood educators themselves as professionals, their rate of pay, and the important role they will be playing when and if they enter that field. And yes, there's people out there on up-teen wait lists. I mean, there's some people on 21 different wait lists to try to find a spot for their child. And even for some children that are not even born yet. Families in their second and third trimester already applying for a daycare spot, so 13.7. And, okay, that's going to be helpful, obviously. So there's plans to expand the YMCA on Ossa Street. It'll accommodate some 80 children, maybe some 10 staffers, but daycare, big conversation. As you know, I'm into it. Price of fuel's down across the board. Gas down some 3 cents-ish. All right. Sticking with energy, where did I put that particular story? So there's a press conference coming up this morning with Industry Minister Andrew Parsons and Jennifer Williams, the CEO at Hydro. So apparently this is going to be about rate mitigation regarding Muskrat Falls. Let's just try to recollect some of the measures that have taken place already. At the onset, the Harper Conservatives put forward a $5 billion federal loan guarantee. Then the Trudeau Liberals put forward a $3 billion federal loan guarantee. And then in the most recent move on that front, it was the $5.2 billion associated with 3 separate entities. $3.2 related to Hibernia, a $1 billion loan, and another $1 billion in the form of a federal loan guarantee, which all meant that we were moving towards somewhere at the beginning of some 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour to extend every year thereafter. There is also maybe an update available today, and I can't tell reporters what to ask, but I'd be interested in not only rate mitigation in the form of federal loan guarantees and Hibernia and the like, but what's the update on what they call the supply cost variance deferral account that was created back in December of 2021. It was approved by the Board of Commissioners at the Public Utilities Board. And it was basically, when there's change in fuel costs, money put into an account that could be indeed rebated to customers. There's a lot to it. In addition to that, hopefully there's an opportunity for Ms. Williams and for Minister Parsons to be asked about a variety of things regarding hydro. Number one, where are we in the evaluation of demand, the forecasted demand? people have really latched on to one of the key recommendations from Hatch that said a 150 megawatt generator, diesel generator, to be located at Holyrood. Jennifer Williams has said repeatedly they are not, they haven't landed on that particular option. But where are we on that front? And maybe some questions associated with things like, do we understand more about what the integration between onshore wind looks like regarding our own grid? Do we have any basic further understanding about the timelines associated with amending the Atlantic Accord to accommodate offshore wind? Do we have any update regarding 2041? Ms. Williams is part of the 2041 negotiating team that has met with representatives of Hydro-Quebec and the government of Quebec. So on top of just those base rate mitigation updates, and I'm curious as to what they hold, but I wonder will we get any more information on those different areas? Because this is going to have a pretty significant impact on all, because we are the customer. Of course, we have the relationship with Emera and Nova Scotia Power on the other side of the maritime link, of which they get access to the first 23% of the power and first right of refusal for all excess power as determined by their regulator, which is the UARB, and that would be at market rates, so that's a moving target as well. So hopefully there's a lot more information coming from these two people this morning. That'll be Jennifer Williams, the CEO at Hydro, and Minister Parsons. In addition to that, I have some very concerned fish harvesters that have been reaching out to me, and a couple of them are really quite cross with me for some reason, even though I have no authority on this front. It's the seismic activity. So we had a conversation with Oceana Canada yesterday regarding the capelin stock. And if you want to chime in on that, well, they're calling for a moratorium to give it a chance to rebuild. And then we're talking about mackerel as a straddle stock, and there's bait fishery this year. But it's seismic. So the worry is that there will be seismic conducted within the next week or so on some of these grounds that see the spawning capelin. We have talked about seismic many times on this program. The province entered into a formal seismic program over the years to bring forward some data to encourage people to get involved in the land sales at the CNLOPB. It was effective. And of course, it's good for the oil industry, but it has a negative impact on marine wildlife. And we're actively trying to get more information on that front as to the schedule and whether or not it's even happening. Because we have to be careful. Of course we do. So it's not a new concept. People were really quite upset a few years ago when the government said, we're not going to do any seismic this year. And the rationale was, we have enough data on hand that we don't need to redo or extend any more seismic data because we have plenty to put forward to oil industry potential suitors in the land sales world. So a lot inside that file, and we can take it on. All right, moving into health. So, update from Newfoundland Labrador Health Services. The fact is, they say they've recruited some 25 new physicians to the province, whether that be from MUN's Faculty of Medicine and or other parts of the country and or internationally. And they're working in a variety of specialties: family medicine, pretty important stuff, anesthesiology, psychiatry, obstetrics, gynecology, general surgery, pathology, and orthopedics. Good. And we'll see what that means for actual wait time and what have you. I don't think it's going to be a matter where we wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden the wait time lists have eroded, but good news. I wonder what the net gain is, though. How many doctors have left in that first 3 quarters or the first 3 months of the year as well? In addition, so as a result of this recruitment, the doctors have to sign on to a 5-year return of service. So a 5-year commitment to work. And they'd be eligible for a variety of incentives, including the come home incentive, the signing bonus, family practice startup program, all of which are pretty generous numbers. Why is it that over the years I've been told repeatedly that a 5-year commitment or a 3-year commitment for graduates at MUN's Medical School doesn't work, couldn't work, won't work? And now, in fact, it's been applied to this round of recruitment. Look, the fact of the matter is, if you have a seat at MUN's Med School, and there's 80 seats there, 65 are for people from this province. We took over the 5 seats that the province of New Brunswick was paying for, so we go from 60 to 65. You're subsidizing their education. I know MUN's Med School budget is a standalone compared to the general budget at Memorial University, but we are, in essence, subsidizing their education. And fair enough. I mean, we need the healthcare professionals. We certainly need doctors. So if it can work this time, how come it hasn't been able to work supposedly over the years? I don't think it's a big ask, and I've never been given a firm answer or an understandable answer as to why it can't or won't work. People will tell me it can't and won't, but apparently it's been applied to this round of 25 recruitees. Anyway, let's talk about that. What's the scribble? Oh, another story in the news today and yesterday about the whole self-checkout. I really don't like the self-checkout. I've used them in the past when there's been a big lineup and I've got like one product in my hand. But by and large, I think it's in our collective best interest if we have these big corporations, the Canadian Tires, the Walmarts, the Loblaws, Sobeys, and the rest of them. And disappointingly, I go to Sobeys quite often in my neighborhood, and now they're adding self-checkouts inside the store that I frequent. And so there you go. There should be a fee. I mean, when people are being hired, humans get hired, of course, they're going to pay taxes. And, of course, this is all about the bottom line for the big corporations. They don't respond to any of our requests for info. And here's where it becomes a real nuisance. Of course, theft is up. Right? Theft is up because people will play footloose and fancy free at the self-checkout. They'll either pretend to or have an innocent mistake at the scanner, or they're putting in incorrect codes for carrots when in fact they've got the pricier product like a grape or grapes that they're going to put in their bag. Then comes the concept of them demanding to see your receipt and to look in your bag. Look, it's not my problem that you have a theft issue. You've created it yourself. So whether you put more security there or staff to monitor the self-checkouts, that's on you. That's not on me. I'm not going to be made to feel like a criminal because you are more concerned with profit than you are with people. So here's the legal experts on this issue. Unless they saw you shoplift, the old 5-finger discount, you are not obliged to open up your bag or show them your receipt. But yet they are doing this at many of these stores, which is really frustrating. So if you sign on for a membership, like at Costco, one of the terms inside that contract is that they can indeed see your receipt and look at your product as you wheel your way out of the Price Club. But not at these other stores. So don't feel obliged. And I know I can only speak for myself, but if I ever used one and I was stopped at the door and they demand to see my bag and my receipt, that's probably the last time I'm going in there. Because it's all bad enough to pay the exorbitant prices, to be then on top of that made to feel like a criminal because you went to shop at their store with your hard-earned money seems patently unfair to me. So the self-checkout and the related theft, that's on the big companies. That's not on me. What do you think? Let's talk about it. A couple of quickies before we get to you. So, are you a federal government employee? Have your paychecks been accurate over the course of the last number of years? Launched in 2016, the system that cost taxpayers some $4 billion, almost $4 billion, the Phoenix Pay system, it has never worked. And I bring it forward because they are trying to move towards another system that's called, was it called Daycare? Well, maybe that's not the right word, but anyway, they're moving to a new system, a Dayforce project. It's been launched as far back as 2018 at the $225 million that year. But imagine a pay system that has never worked costs us $4 billion. We have talked to Chris Aylward at PSAC about the ongoing concerns and maybe moving on to this already tried and true operating system. I mean, it's used by the province of Ontario, the state of California. The problem is, with so many collective bargaining agreements in place and so many different human resources departments that have to be included with the inputs for the pay, then we've seen the debacle that has been Phoenix. So if you're a federal government employee and you want to tell us your story, let's talk about it. And just as a wrap-up to that story, people will talk about the size of the public service. They always will. Whether it be provincially, the numbers of people working for the city of St. John's, or whether it be working for the federal government. Payroll annually for the federal public servants, $36 billion a year. 420,000 people work for the federal government. You want to take it on? Let's go. A couple of very quick ones before we get to you. So it's seemingly becoming more and more clear that the federal government's move to say that the rich need to pay more, and that would, of course, be the change in the inclusion rate for capital gains. They've really undersold it. I mean, how many professionals in this country do indeed have corporations set up for their profits and or for some of their pay? And that's going to be an implication for many. There's some 10 to 11% of Canadians own a second home, maybe in the form of a cottage. And there's even more than that own a rental property. So they're going to have this particular issue. June 25 is the date where it changes from 50% to 67% of capital gains over $250,000. Here's a quote from the Financial Post on this particular issue, and I think this is interesting. June 25 is now only 41 days away. The timeline is a big problem, getting bigger every day. Right now, the budget's announcements are all we know. It contained no draft legislation, and the budget implementation bill that was tabled on the 2nd of May contained no details. The federal government is expecting affected taxpayers to sell a lot of assets before June 25. It's counting on a one-time $7 billion revenue bump from the sell-off, far above the change's ongoing yield, to help it hit its deficit and debt targets this year. But lack of legislation or clarification of the changes may mean the government itself has not figured out how its announcements will actually work. There's no details. There's no accompanying legislation. So we've seen the big numbers, and we can talk about big numbers all we want, but maybe, just maybe, the budget has been tabled and it's been passed, but the implementation legislation and no details associated with it? What? Anyway, and just throw around millions and billions. And I like doing this because we use billion as a very casual reference to money when $1 billion is a lot of money. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. 1 trillion seconds is 31,688 years. Federal deficit, about $1.2 trillion. So $1 billion we use very carefree. Hey, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. $1 billion is a ton of money. All right, yesterday we had a conversation with Margaret, I believe the caller's name was, about Alzheimer's, dementia, and what goes on in protective care wards, and some of the forecasted numbers in the country regarding dementia, and they're really quite staggering. Back in 2019, I believe in the summer of 19, the federal government did launch an Alzheimer's-related strategy. We're going to talk about it to kick off the show this morning with Shirley Lucas. She's the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. She's first, and then Chris is also in the queue. He wants to talk about an interesting concept about how we store ammonia. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2 and say good morning to the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. That is Shirley Lucas. Let me see if I can get the right clicker here. And good morning, Shirley. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How you doing?
I'm doing okay this morning. How about you?
I'm doing good.
So I think sometimes we conflate a couple of things. When people talk about dementia, now Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia, and we see that Alzheimer's a disease accounts for about 60 to 80% of dementia cases. What's the other 20% related to?
Well, there's other types of dementia. Actually, there's over 50 different types of dementia, and there's vascular, there's frontal lobe dementia, and that other people may have.
Such as? Can you give us some idea there?
In terms of the numbers of the people. So there's 50 different types, as I said, and so people could have a different type of dementia based on, history or different things. As I said, they could have vascular, they could have frontal lobe, they could have, there is also mixed dementia, that people have different types of dementia, could have 2 types, and there's young onset dementia, which is a huge issue that came up in our recent report on the landmark study in January.
Yeah, and in those numbers, just for context there, the number of people under the age of 65 with dementia in Canada could rise to more than 40,000 people by 2050. The estimated in 2020 was 28,000, so we are really fast-tracking there. What do we understand about why those trends would be the way they are? Are we talking about lifestyle and diet or genetics? What are people focusing on to talk about the move from 28,000 to 40,000?
Yeah, that's certainly a significant increase, and I think that lifestyle, the population is aging, and people need to look at in terms of having a healthy brain, doing things that is going to keep their brain active, and various things of that nature. So it is some significant jumps, but age is one of the key factors that account for a lot of those number increases. Yeah,
apparently when you reach the age of 85, 1 in 4 people of that age range will develop Alzheimer's and possibly dementia. So, the forecast at large in the general population, 1.7 million people in the country will have dementia by 2050. So as a result, back in 2019, there was the launch of Canada's National Dementia Strategy. Before we get into that, just a question based on a caller yesterday. The concern was in what they call protective care units, whether that be in long-term care facilities or elsewhere. Exactly what are the protocols look like inside those protective care units?
You mean in terms of protocols for the care?
Yeah, for the care.
There are long-term care standards that are in place within the care facilities within the province, And obviously, when COVID happened a number of years ago, right across Canada, the long-term care standards certainly became questionable. And each province is looking at those to kind of make changes to the type of care, to the type of staff ratios, education, and various things.
There's a number that I refer back to quite often because I think it might have a direct relationship with things like protective care units, and that's the use of physical restraints. In long-term care, the most recent numbers we have is in Newfoundland and Labrador, 14.2% of residents in LTC are in restraints daily. The Canadian national average is 6.5%. Is that a number that's come across your desk? And does it bring you any level of concern? Because to me, we haven't been offered reasons as to why the disparity between the province and the rest of the country. Is it that fact that we don't have enough staff, and consequently, especially for folks who have dementia, they just end up in restraints?
Well, I certainly can't speak to the staffing issue. The Alzheimer's Society don't support, the use of restraints. We encourage other alternatives for people to consider in terms of looking to the source of the problem, looking to allow the person to, move around independently and safely within the facilities. I think that from staffing issues, I think straight across the board there are staffing issues with things within all sectors. And I think it is something that does need to be looked at, and we need to get to a better place so that these people are cared for appropriately. Yeah,
I mean, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot regarding staffing issues, but my worry has long been that if there's a shortage of staff and the need to keep people safe to protect themselves and or others on the ward, that they end up in restraints, which can be quite heartbreaking if you're a loved one coming in to visit Nan or Pop and you find them lashed to the chair. So really quite something. So with those forecasted numbers, 1.7 million Canadians by 2050, it's all about preparation. We've seen the numbers, we understand what they look like, we understand the implications on the healthcare system and supports for families, which we'll get into now in a minute. But inside the dementia strategy, with a disease that we don't really understand all the contributing factors as to why, we know there's no cure. There are some treatments which can be effective for some dementia patients. But what does the strategy look like? Because if it's a disease that is going to happen and is progressive and there is no cure, what do we even look to inside the federal government strategy?
Well, I guess one of the things we need to look for within the strategy is optimizing the healthcare system and the support within the system, within the community, and various things of that nature. And we need to improve the knowledge of dementia. It is a complex condition, as you had mentioned, and we need to kind of offer the knowledge so that staff and the general public are prepared to be able to deal with it, so that communities become more dementia friendly, so that the care facilities become more dementia friendly. With the growing numbers, we need to really focus on this and be prepared for what's to come.
In addition to people who have dementia, whether it be early onset or otherwise, there's also major concerns out there for caregivers and their family members. So inside the national strategy, what does it look like on that front? Because we can have, piecemeal different approaches across the country, but some federal guidance and some federal, not only intervention, but I guess guidance is the right word. What do we do now for the caregivers, loved ones, family members of people with dementia?
Well, I think one of the key things that we need to do is we need to get the diagnosis. We need to fast track and get the diagnosis done sooner than we have been, so families have knowledge of what they're dealing with, what type of dementia they may have, and we need to improve the coordination of care so that it helps alleviate some of the stress and some of the concerns of family members. As I mentioned as well, in terms of having a more dementia-friendly community, so that the community at large is there to be able to support them, reduce stigma when a diagnosis is given, so that families are able to access some of the sports or come forward for some of the sports that are available, because that is a problem in that there is still a significant stigma attached to the diagnosis.
Can you help us understand what a dementia-friendly community looks like?
So a dementia-friendly community, I guess the example I often give is if you go to the supermarket and a person with dementia goes in, there's not signs all over the place everywhere, which can kind of add some confusion, may need some extra assistance at the checkouts, so that people are supportive of those types of interactions, so that they don't go in and kind of feel like, they've forgotten something, or that they're not being encouraged by the staff to be able to process the transaction, those sorts of things.
In the world of stigma, I mean, how does that get associated with dementia? Because, you know, we've had this conversation about mental illness, what have you, but this is a cognitive issue. And so it's not brought upon yourself by things you've done. I mean, they've made some links between smoking and lifestyle and diet and, you know, keeping your brain active and healthy. But what does stigma look like?
Well, stigma for families when they tell someone, you know, that a loved one has been diagnosed with dementia, they're concerned about how that person is being treated. Again, it's about having that public awareness to know that just because there's a dementia diagnosis, life isn't over. The person can still contribute and participate in the community, can be engaged in different activities. What we often see is the community at large, when they know that someone has dementia, they start talking to the caregiver as opposed to the person. Coming up with ways to be able to support them in the community. And again, you know, people think that with that diagnosis, people change, but there's a need to kind of be there for them in the community.
These, what they call pan-Canadian strategies, can be effective when we talk about longevity and the kind of care received. And, you know, you look to the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. But inside that world, they've managed to figure out a way to measure successes of the strategies. Now, this, people have referred to whether or not this is a fully funded strategy. Initially, the money was $50 million, which is not a lot of money when we talk about the numbers of people impacted and their families. So, number one, is it fully funded in your opinion? And how do we measure whether or not the strategy is successful?
Well, I guess in terms of being fully funded, I mean, it's a challenge to have anything fully funded, so there's always going to be a need for more. But I guess in addition to the federal strategy, there is a dementia care action plan within this province that there is, a council is the name of the committee who are working on different strategies here and putting different measures in place. If you recall, last year, Minister Osborne came in and did the announcement of what was being applied to the dementia care strategy. So I think we're trying to, as different groups in the community, us, Seniors NL and the Eastern zones, are finding ways to be able to work together more to have a better coordinated system of care, to look at, promoting the risk factors of dementia in the community, and to be able to support individuals living in the community and their care partners.
How does research in Canada compare to other similar first world countries? Because, there is no cure, but advancements in therapies have seen some forward progress. So how does the research look like in this country when compared to other similar countries?
I think that Canada does have, I won't say a lead, but the Alzheimer's Society is a lead funder in research across Canada. So I think that, there's always different areas that are ongoing across Canada who are doing different levels of research, but obviously there are some other countries that do have different advancements in terms of treatment options.
I surely appreciate your time. Any final thoughts?
I just want to, send a message that if anybody is in need of support or education on dementia, we are certainly available for people to call us to be able to gain access to that education across the province. As a charity, it is very hard sometimes to get that message out there so people know where to turn. So I'll just give you our number, which is 576-0608, that people can certainly call. And I guess one final thought is that on May 26th, we will be doing our annual IG Wealth Management Walk for Alzheimer's, and we'll be doing it at Pippi Park. So if people want to get out and walk and be a part of raising awareness for people with dementia, we'd certainly appreciate that. I
appreciate your time. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Shirley Lucas, the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society. The numbers forecasted are really startling. 1.7 million Canadians is the forecasted number by 2050, and preparation, of course, will be key. Let's take a break. When we go back, Chris, you're next to talk about the storage of ammonia. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number one. Good morning, Chris. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. We got a beautiful day here on the West Coast. If other for the threat of ammonia being pumped into the groundwater.
Let's talk about it. So I see you tweet about these related matters quite frequently. So what's in play on the West Coast?
Right. So there's a company named Vortex Energy, which, as an advisor and a shareholder, has Senator George Fury on board. And they are managing a salt mine, and that's passed environmental assessment. And so the first wave of their business strategy is to extract salt from the mine. Pretty sensible thing. The step after that they're suggesting is then making hydrogen storage caverns, or what they refer to in several points in their couple press releases as an energy cavern. And so they are looking at not only storing hydrogen underground, but also ammonia. And so this came up in the province's hydrogen roadmap. It was point number 20. Said that the province will be looking to explore geological opportunities to store hydrogen and ammonia. And that actually looks a little bit like a mistake, because storing ammonia outside of a tank is, generally speaking, a very bad idea. It is an incredible contaminant. It can leach into groundwater. It is quite different than some of the other things that we store in salt caverns, namely natural gas or hydrogen. There's a little bit of that being done. The ammonia can dissolve the salt walls itself, and so compromise the integrity of the structure. It reacts with it, and so the short answer is that is not a way that any industry anywhere is storing ammonia, because it is a very bad idea.
That's the question. Is this actually happening elsewhere? Because when I've seen you tweet about it, I try to look around about salt storage, hydrogen and or ammonia. They all talk about cool, ventilated, that's references to tanks more often than not. But then they talk about the porous nature of one cavern or another, and the determination, if it can be deemed to be controllable, and at what pressure we store things like hydrogen, and the porous nature of the cavern. Those are all the variables that have to be assessed. I don't know if it's ever been done anywhere else, period. To be honest, I couldn't find it.
No, not with ammonia. There is an American patent from like the early 1900s, and then an extraction patent from the 1970s, I think it is. And then one Department of Energy funding announcement from 2016, I think it was, to explore it, and then that never went anywhere. And so there is, with the salt cavern, there is the potential that you could, say, line the inside of it and then make a very large underground tank out of this structure. But that is going to be, one, very, very cost prohibitive. You may as well just build a tank above ground where you can actually see all the walls and know that it won't leak into the groundwater if there is some type of, rupture.
And we started about the storage, but of course, salt demand is enormous. Even just in the North American market alone, there's a deficit of some 10 million tons. So Vortex is sitting on a pretty profitable find of salt, but it's then what? Of course, to add to their profitability, if they were able to charge whoever, John Risley's company, to store hydrogen and or ammonia, then that's just the carrot on top. So I don't pretend to know a whole lot about this concept. And then its relationship to water tables, a relationship to aquifers, proximity to, all those things that I don't know that is it Robinson's Brook, or is that the name of that salt find?
So there's two salt deposits out here on the West Coast. There's the Robinson's deposit, and then I think the other one is called Fischel's, maybe. That's a little bit of a guess, but there's there's Vortex and there's Atlas, and so a sustainable salt mine is not a bad thing for the island to have. That's quite a reasonable thing. And salt cavern storage is part of modern industrial infrastructure. But the idea that you can just kind of shove anything in there, including ammonia, is like that is much closer to flight of fancy than anything else I've seen in the hydrogen discussion so far. And there's already some kind of sketchy economics to the export markets, and who's going to buy this $5 or $6 a kilogram green hydrogen, which at the moment is nobody. But there's there has been no idea that I can see that is quite as bad as pumping ammonia underground. That is, I think, you've done some great work on talking about the social license that the province and these companies may or may not have. No one has been talking about storing ammonia underground to the public or to the communities, or it's really not been part of the public dialogue. And so that has made it to a working item in a roadmap for the province's industrial strategy. And the Premier's father just happens to be on the board of the one company doing it in the world. That is not innovation. That is, that's no good for anyone.
And that's not part of the environmental assessment of the wind project itself. This would be something that has to be considered as a standalone. I don't even know if there's a real need to store the ammonia in these particular salt caverns or anywhere else. I don't know why we'd be producing so much ammonia that would be used for something other than the medium to transport the green hydrogen versus produce so much of it that we have to store it somewhere, as opposed to just tanks, which are traditionally understood as storage units for ammonia. So I don't even know why there would be so much ammonia that needs to be stored elsewhere.
Well, if things go well, which is a big if, then a good problem for any of these companies to have would be more ammonia or hydrogen that they can sell for the moment. Because if you can store it and find a good arbitrage opportunity, and that's to be able to store a resource is adds to the commodification of it. So that in a sense is planning for success, but put those tanks above ground. That seems to be just a really reasonable way to do that, and not put excess risk on the public, who is already bearing a huge portion of the cost of these projects.
Well, and even the price of the product itself when it makes its way to market, if and when the MOU ends up to be an actual power purchase agreement, whether it be Germany or elsewhere, is don't take it from me, take it from the Germans. They already know what the price point looks like at this moment in time, and hasn't been finalized, whether it be World Energy or Everac or anybody else at this point. But they've set aside 1.2 billion euros to help offset the cost. So they know that this is a relatively expensive product when compared to some other sources of creating hydrogen, whether it be from nuclear or otherwise. So this is not settled, I don't imagine. Chris, anything else you want to add?
I just for your last caller, really big thank you to all the people who lend care to people suffering with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's a pretty terrible thing to go through, and the staff and the volunteers and family members and caregivers that help make that easier are quite important to our society.
Absolutely. I see it in action. We've got a friend with early onset, and it's been difficult to watch. Chris, thanks for making time for the show.
Thank you, Patty. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. And you talk about storage, and this once again came in via email. And I know there's probably plenty of people tune in sometimes or whenever you like or whenever you can. Some people tune in all the time. But the question as to why we haven't been talking about carbon capture and carbon storage or sequestration, and we have, of course we have. And maybe it's time to go back to Dr. Leslie James, I believe is her name, one of the researchers at Memorial University, inside that pot of $6 million over the course of 3 years to examine the possibilities off our shore. Dr. James is looking for $3 million to conduct her research. And so the basics are, whether it be capturing emissions at Holyrood or the offshore platforms themselves, and then after capture is to inject it into the depleted wells offshore. Okay. The largest carbon capture project in the country was out in Alberta. It cost them $2.5 billion, and now they've shut it down. They say it's not economically viable. They went on at the beginning and said they promised that the facility could capture 90% of the emissions, and of course they've never hit 60. So whether that be a greenwashing tool, a favorite of the oil and gas industry, whether or not it can work, how effective and efficient can it be, how much it's going to cost, because we're all going to end up chipping in on it. And so people, this person wanted me to put carbon storage out there, and happy to take it on. All right, let's take a break. But when we come back, we're looking forward to speaking with you. If you're in and around town, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. We're taking a break, and then we're coming back. Welcome back to the show, and as happens frequently during a break, someone will send an email, why didn't you say this, why didn't you say that? Okay, happy to say, speak to issues of importance, and of course my favorite is when you call, if you want to elaborate or add to the conversations, let's do it. When the reference was made to people passing school buses in Kenmount Terrace, or 32 speeding tickets handed out in a single school zone in CBS on Tuesday, and I said that, all the worries we have inside the school, and then all the worries we have getting the children to and from school. And yes, this person sends along concerns regarding bullying, and I'm pretty sure I've seen this email addressed in the past, and I'm also pretty sure they had a young child that was being relentlessly bullied in school. And it's interesting that they sent that specific email, because when I was scrolling through social media this morning, I saw a story from Indiana. There was a 10-year-old boy, after being relentlessly bullied, beat up on the school bus, taunted about his hair and his teeth and all the rest of it. A 10-year-old dies by suicide. So, again, when we talk about Amanda Todd or this young fella down in Indiana, and some people think that, you're exaggerating to make a point regarding just how dangerous it can possibly be to be on the receiving end and the victim of the bullies. And of course, 99 times out of 100, the bullies are cowards to begin with, and the thought is that maybe all the level-headed students can do what they can do to take their own school back out of the control of the bullies that really do dominate, and they scare people. Even if you're not on the receiving end, you see maybe one of your buddies get taunted and bullied, and it can be frightening for a young child. And then, add to it, so often when we talk about these stories, is advice that people want me to pass on is, tell so-and-so to, have their child stand up for themselves. That's easier said than done. I mean, bullies are pretty crafty in targeting their victims, and generally they'd be pretty vulnerable and or small and or easily intimidated, whatever the case may be. The bullies don't go after the high school quarterback. They don't go after the big defenseman on the high school hockey team. They go after people who are right there for the taking, easy pickings. So to say just fight back, most people who have encouraged little kids to fight back have they themselves probably never clenched a fist, throw a punch, or received a punch in their life. So I don't know if that's really helpful advice, because most kids on the receiving end are far too young and small and scared and intimidated to begin with to think that fighting back is an idea. So again, I know some people think that this is hyperbole and it's sensationalizing a very dangerous subject, but the examples are out there to be heard. Children have indeed taken their own life, died by suicide, simply because of something like a bully at school. So anyway, they wanted me to add that to the conversation. I'm happy to do it. We can talk about whatever you like. Let's go to line number 1. Rod, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. How are you?
I'm okay, Rod. How you doing?
I'm not good. I'm quite very, very sick, which leads me to my story.
Okay.
So I went to Carbonear Hospital. And Patty, I'm not sure exactly what day it is, because things happen 3 o'clock in the morning and I get out of the hospital 1 o'clock the next day. I don't know which days they are. I sit here now at home, still as sick as I was before I went to Carbonear Hospital, where after sitting for 4 hours, no ambulances ever showed up. There were 3 people in the waiting room and me, 4 of us. Not a movement of any human being in the emergency department whatsoever. There was 4 people, 3 and me. They were there before me. I sat there for over 4 hours, and Patty, I was in convulsions and shaking and just simply sick. I ain't no doctor, but when you do get sick, you probably like to see a doctor. And if you go to the emergency department, you wouldn't want to be treated like the enemy. It is totally berserk and disgusting. Do you know, Patty, sick as I was physically thrown out of the emergency department. There was no other place on earth that I needed to be. And so, anyway, finally sick and shaking and whatnot. So I'm not pleasant, and I'm certainly not an ignorant fellow. But I did go up to say, is there anybody here? Because it crossed my mind that quite often there are no doctors in the emergency department. You all just got to wait. Maybe one will be in the morning. But those are things I don't know. But if you ask a question, you are automatically, you've discussed it, whoever you're talking with. I don't know. I don't know. Is there a doctor on? Yes. Not a pleasant person. Already, I'm the enemy. I'm not the main concern in the hospital.
So what led to you being thrown out? So you simply went up and asked the triage nurse, what's happening? Any update? Are there any doctors back there? And then they just threw you out.
No, she just kept giving me sassy answers and stuff, and I'd say, look, I just want to know. Am I wasting my time? Just let me know something. And so immediately the Gestapo, which God love Mr. Fury, he's put the Gestapo in every hospital. If you open your mouth or you step out of any kind of fantasy that they live in. The people in these, Paddy, that's only one place. That was where I actually got pushed out. And I'm sure there are cameras in those hospitals everywhere. I will be, I don't know if I'm going to sue the department or what, but I am not. On behalf of the people in Newfoundland, what went on in Carbonair is not fit.
Were you physically walked out the door? Like, what does kicked out mean? Someone took you a bag of bones and out the door?
Have you ever stood up and somebody gets right in your face, in your space?
I have been in that circumstance, absolutely. Of course I have.
This is how I was treated, not over a big long discussion or anything, but immediately. This big fellow sitting right next to the triage, you can see everything is going on. So what he saw was, oh goodness, I don't know, a fellow who's not acting normal, which is me. I'm in convulsions, shaking and everything. Somebody should have grabbed me by the arm and brought me right into the emergency and said, hang on. But no such thing. So anyway, nothing. I didn't start no fuss, and if I did start a fuss, it was shaking. And I'm sick, and I am here now, 24 hours later, sitting at home with no medication, sick as a dog, still as much as I was 4 days ago. So I got threw out physically, I will say, accosted, touched me, and walked me the door. If you ever went to Carbonair Emergency, the door and the triage desk is only 20 feet apart. So if they want to throw you out, they don't have to walk you down the hallway or anything whatsoever. It's just the door's there. Open the door, get out, have a nice day. Now, look at that ignorance. I'm not tolerating it, Mr. Fury. You have put the Gestapo in all these hospitals. Anybody going to these hospitals now are immediately treated like the enemy.
Yeah, I don't know if that has much to do with the Premier's office, but when people are ill, they should be treated with the required bedside manner and respect and compassion.
That's there. But Paddy, that's only me, and there were no people there. So I left. I did have an appointment with my own doctor. 10 o'clock after I got out of there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I waited in the doctor's parking lot. Went and see him. Gave me a bunch of prescriptions and stuff. I said, I'm still so bloody sick. And I went I got in the car and I drove to St. John's, which I shouldn't. But I shouldn't sit down and die either. So options were limited. And I went. I made it. And went to the Health Sciences. Well, Paddy, I have never seen it before. There are a lot of sick people who use these hospitals, and I'm sure it's the same in many places across the country. But I went in and checked in. I was shaking again, obviously, because my assessment is that you're bloody sick, Rod. You're very, very sick. And I went through triage. And shaking, and people were saying, my God, you better sit down and the patients were more concerned about my health than anybody in triage. I went through triage, and I'm a diabetic, not a very good one. So now I haven't eaten for about almost 24 hours. and I'm in the hospital in the waiting rooms for 12 or 14 hours altogether. So I did go over and ask the triage nurse, because now I'm happily waiting in line. There were 200 people, is my estimate, in waiting rooms around the emergency department, where I thought, there's only 25 or 30 people, maybe 40 here. But when you step out in another area, there's another 40 in there and another 50 over there.
Okay, before we have to get to the news, at the end of the day, have you been diagnosed? Do you know what's wrong? Are you getting the help?
Nothing. But look here, what I got to tell you, got to be heard. I saw a lady walk out of the emergency department. They must have told her, go outside and wait again. So she walked out. She was crippled, Paddy. I'm guessing about 40 years old. She walked out crying. Something really down in her bowels where her intestines were paining so much she was crying. And she couldn't sit in the wheelchair. She couldn't sit on the chairs. She lied down on the floor and crawled in underneath the chairs because she was like a dog run over in the streets. Anyway, I got up as good as I could. And a fella, a doctor, I'm assuming, big man in his greens, came out, and I said, look, there's a lady here, come over and look at her. So, oh my goodness, I wasn't basically, he sort of insinuated, I'm not looking for her. So, but he called the name, and I said, yeah, but you are now looking for her. Here she is, look what happened. And so he tapped her. Now, she's after crawling behind 2 rows of chairs for her own security. He looked at her, and he said, hello. And then he stood up again and tried to holler out. Certainly not nice. Tried to holler out, and he said, well, can't be too much wrong with her. She's on Facebook.
Yeah, which doesn't mean that you're healthy because you're on Facebook. In fact, it might lead to poor health. Rod, I got to jump in and get to the news. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
I appreciate your time. I hope you're well. Take good care.
Yeah.
Pardon? Okay, well, it's 10:04 and a half. I have to get to the news. I hope Rod's doing okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the pending vote to replace, for the executive positions at the FFAW. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 7. Say good morning to one of the people running for the FFAW presidency. That's Dwan Street. Good morning, Dwan. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's a bit of a historic election, I think. Might be one of the biggest contested presidential elections that we've had in the history of the Union.
Do we know how many people are running?
As of now, it seems like there are 3 candidates for the position of president, and I've seen this morning that one of my colleagues, Abe Solberg, has declared his intention to run as well as, of course, Bill Broderick, who has 60 years in this industry. So right off the top, I'd just like to say I wish them both the best and look forward to a great campaign.
Before we get into some of the nitty-gritty here, back when the Fish NL days were ongoing, and of course trying to establish a standalone union representing harvesters only, we were told that folks who were so-called card-carrying Fish NLers were not allowed to run for positions on the executive at the FFAW. Now when we have a new co-op that's a standalone, and still some of the folks who have been part of the dissent aimed at the union, are they allowed to run, the so-called former Fish NLers?
Knowledge, yes. There had been a bylaw in our constitution, and I think it was don't quote me on this, I think it was a 4-year limit if you were a member of an opposing organization that would have deemed you ineligible. But I've spoken to a lot of folks who had some, very legitimate issues at the time with how they felt things were going, and had some good conversations. And I certainly appreciate those folks to reach out, and we can have a great chat about anything. But when it comes to Fish NL and those days, as far as I'm concerned, that's all water under the bridge. And what I think we need to do now is focus on going forward rather than what's happened. And, I think there were a lot of lessons learned, and things that, we can always be doing better. So, I just think that we need to be focusing more on moving forward and moving this industry into the future, given, it's a totality of a bunch of moving parts constantly. And I think we need to focus on that right now.
Before we get into some of the other issues, there was a couple of harvesters that are reaching out to me talking about some plant seismic activity, especially in grounds where the spawn and capelin are gathered. Do you know anything about this plan?
So I do know a bit about the seismic. We fabulous industry liaison at the office. Her name is Katie Power. Katie keeps all of us in the loop on what's going on, and of course we've always been opposed to seismic, and one of my roles within the union, I actually did serve as the industry liaison at one point. Seismic is very, very troubling, and we see studies. There were a lot done in Australia on the effects on fish stocks and what that does to biology, the environment, and we have been taking a stance very strongly over the years on when it comes to seismic, and we do ensure that there is no seismic on fishing grounds during the fishing season. But it is definitely a concern now, because during the COVID years, seismic was pretty much null and void. There wasn't much going on, but right now we're starting to see it ramp up again. So it's something that we're going to have to definitely keep our ear on the ground and be constantly aware of.
The union, under the current leadership of Mr. Purdy, talking about, they say between ASP and FFAW, talk about the most recent agreements regarding pricing formulas, specifically with crab, lobster and halibut. Mr. Purdy has called it a great achievement. I see on the Fisherman's Forum, though, still plenty of question as to whether or not they've achieved what the rally cry was, and that was free enterprise. Now, that means different things to different people. In your estimation, have we arrived at a place where the harvesters' needs and wants have been satisfied by these new market-based pricing formulas?
We are not there yet. I think what we saw this year, especially with the very, very well-attended protests on the Hill, it was a beautiful sight to see, really. We're not there yet, but I think we finally cracked the ice, and it was a baby step, in my opinion, but it's a very positive step, and one that we need to make sure we keep that momentum going, keep government's feet to the fire, and, if we need to be up on that hill tomorrow, we'll be back up on that hill. There are significant concerns right now with the whole price setting panel situation. The system is broken, and I know you've heard Mr. Purdy say that. How do we fix it? I think we get a bunch of harvesters in the room, and we get ASP in the room, which to date they haven't been too keen on doing when it comes to price on multiple species. And I've been at that table, whether it be crab, cod, lobster. We need to get back to the days when we could sit at the table and hash something out, because I don't think that the current system is working for our members. I'm sure you've seen in the news as well that we have plant members that are facing down a strike vote potentially this weekend. Our industry is still in turmoil, and when it comes to free enterprise, what Mr. Effort did is absolutely fabulous, and my hat off to John. And he made some definite significant gains, but I think we do have to sit down not only with ourselves, but also with our colleagues in the Maritimes. We're not isolated here as we often think we are. And myself, for instance, on lobster, I serve on the executive board of the Lobster Council of Canada. And when we're talking about outside buyers, I don't think it should be left in the hands of the harvesters to find those outside buyers, as it has been. I think we need to approach our colleagues in the Maritimes. We need to have those conversations. They have plants closing right now. They have buyers and processors going bankrupt. We have the products. So, I think we need to get those people around the table and see if there might be a potential way forward that we can collaborate across provinces in our industry and make this work, because the Newfoundland fishery is not just the Newfoundland fishery. Our products are going global, and we need to make sure that we're aware of that entire chain of custody and doing what we can to not only provide that product, but market it and make sure we're getting the maximum value for it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We just need to have the vision and to be able to take the reins to do it.
So if this was a baby step, what would the next big step be? Because I try not to oversimplify things, but, if there was a basic understanding of what percentage of the market price would be afforded to the harvester and to the processor, because the market's only going to pay and bear what the market can bear. So if this was a baby step, describe what the next steps would be if we're going to make it better, specifically for the harvester.
I think the committee that government has committed to with Mr. Effort and representation from ASP, from plant workers, from harvesters, I think that's going to be a very, very important move forward. I'm a big fan of just getting out and talking to harvesters and seeing what they need. I've been with this union for 10 years, and the way I work, my philosophy has always been, I work for you, you don't work for me, and I'm here to represent what you want. Like if someone from my fleet comes to me and says that there's a policy change that they'd like to see, or there's anything at all, it's not my job to tell somebody how they should be running their enterprise. It's my job to listen when they come to me and say how they think that they could benefit and what I can do to help them move forward with government and move forward with the buyers and make their enterprises more profitable, because at the end of the day, that's the overall goal. And I think there needs to be increased attention on listening to our members, servicing our members, building a bridge there with government and making sure our members are heard. And as I said earlier, keeping government's feet to the fire on the commitments that they've made, and with the committee that is formed, it's going to be key. And, if that breaks down, we're going to be back up on that hill.
Fair enough. And just quickly before I let you go, in the world of marketing, I think one of the big problems that came out of the sell-off of FPI is not keeping that marketing arm, because it was really effective. It had wide tentacles spread all over the world looking at potential markets. So whether it be going to the Boss's Seafood Show, which seems to be just like the fundamentals of marketing, and then people are really quite interested in knowing where their catch came from. So like on white tablecloth menus and restaurants in New York City, someone would be quite chuffed to say, well, I'd like to have the cod. Oh, that was caught in a cod pot off Fogo Island. So when you talk about marketing, what do you mean?
We've really dropped the ball as a province on marketing our products. You're absolutely right when it came to the dissolving of that marketing arm of FPI, because, if you get off a plane in Maine or you get off a plane in Moncton, what's the first thing you see? Or Halifax, you see lobsters. And, they market their seafood so well. And I think there needs to be a greater investment by our province to market our seafood. And I know that when it comes to snow crab, obviously every company has their markets pretty much nailed down. And you're right about Boston. It's key that we participate in those events as well, and with Brussels as well being a major, major show. But we need our province to step up and commit to tossing some dollars into marketing, and that needs to be industry-wide. Snow crab is our biggest industry, but we have other products, like you said with cod, lobster specifically as well is growing and is our second largest species right now. We need to put the energy and the time into marketing our products. Again, I think we need to collaborate and learn from our colleagues in the Maritimes. For instance, myself and Jason Spingle, our current Secretary-Treasurer, and for anybody who doesn't know, he's also putting his name forward in this election, so I wish him luck, have had some great conversations about focusing on quality in lobster, because, of course, other provinces have their product Marine Stewardship Council certified, and we do not. So we're fighting against a certified product in the market, but we continue to hear that our product is superior. So how do we get that out into other markets? I think we need to have a presence at trade shows. There's massive ones in China, which they've become major consumers of a lot of our products, lobster, sea cucumber, whelk, stuff that we would probably look at and consider minor exports, but at the end of the day, we need to start maximizing value of every single product that we have, and we need to make sure that the value of that product is going into the pockets of harvesters, because when money goes into the pockets of a harvester and a plant worker, that's staying in our rural communities. And that's the fight we have right now, is to make sure our rural communities survive. I'm from a very, very small community. I'm sure you know, Patty, Spillers Cove, 52 people. But, the lifeblood is the fishery. And I think it's key that right now we need somebody at the table in the FFAW in a leadership role that's not going to sit by and let somebody in Ottawa or somebody down at the ASP office choose which one of our rural communities is going to live and which one is going to survive. Because I think there's an opportunity here for all of them. And, with what we're looking at now, with the lobster industry revitalizing, with the value in snow crab, the value of those other products, I think we have a really good chance to make sure that we revitalize those communities. And I think this election right now is definitely a pivotal moment in the history of this union.
I appreciate the time this morning, Duane. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye. Go on Street,
bye-bye.
running for the presidency of the FFAW. Let's take a break. When we come back, Debbie, you're next. Don't go away. Welcome back. Let's go. Line number 3. Shirley, you're on the air.
Hi, Paddy. How you doing?
Great today. How about you?
Good. I'm okay. I'm concerned about the milk cartons. I tell you right now, I got rheumatoid arthritis in my hands very bad, and trying to get them milk cartons open, you got to use scissors, you got to use knives. You think they have a handle on them or a stopper or something, so I just want to put it out there for the seniors and everything. I can't even buy 2 litres of milk no more because I can't get them open.
So you mean the traditional, like you got to fold it back, pop them open cartons?
The 2 litres of milk, yes, but I haven't got no strength in my hands so much, but so I can't do it. So you think they have a stopper on top or a handle or something that you can hold on to, because there's no possible way. I don't even buy it anymore because I can't get them open.
That's difficult. So what do you do to buy milk? You just buy the smaller plastic one with a screw top?
No, I tell you the truth. No, I just didn't bother to buy any. I tell you the truth, because I was so fed up trying to get the cartons open, tipping over the sink and on the floor, and then you got to clean up all the mess. So I just want to put it out there for Central Dairies that they do something about this, put stoppers on them or handles or something, or change the cartons or something. Hey.
Yeah, other parts of the country get it in a big plastic bag. You just snip it with the scissors, and off you go. Yes,
and that's a lot easier. Just put in your own jug or something, right?
Fair ball. I don't know much about the carton designs, and I'm one of those strange folks. I shake the milk before I open the carton too, but apparently there's no need of that. Shirley, good suggestion. Yeah. We'll see if anyone else wants to pick up on it. I appreciate your time.
Okay, then, Paddy. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Same to you. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, Shirley. All right, let's keep going. And now, Debbie on one. Debbie, you're on the air.
Hello, Paddy. How are you?
Top shelf this morning. How about you?
Good. A little excited, I guess. I've talked to you before about psychedelics, and in particular psychedelic cannabis.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I've come full circle. I think that, particularly today, for anybody that understands the illness, PTSD or complex PTSD, we have triggers because things have happened in our past, and when we see or hear things, it'll trigger us, and it'll trigger our nervous system to have anxiety, or in my case, a whole bunch of different things. One in particular that I used to have is PNES, which is psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. You tested me a minute ago, Patty. I cannot believe it. I'm going to try to do this really short. My mother's name, who passed away last week, by the way, is Shirley. You said Debbie will be on next, and then when you said, hello, Shirley, that would have triggered me because my mother disowned me. There was abuse in our family. My mother, it was mainly abandonment. So when my mother passed away last week, I wasn't notified. The family has disowned me. So that would have been a massive trigger for me. Her death, and the really weird thing that you were supposed to be speaking to me, I thought, and you said, hello, Shirley. Now, normally, Patty, before I did psychedelic cannabis treatment, I would have had a seizure. My husband would have had to take the phone and say, sorry, Debbie, can't talk.
Of course, Dave came in and asked me to take Shirley because it was going to be very quick. That's why that happened.
No, I'm glad, because it was a wonderful test for me, because I have been I started out in October of 2022, and I went to New Brunswick, and I started using psychedelics. There's a person there who did treatment with me and gave me various psychedelics, including LSD, MDMAs, cannabis, magic mushrooms, DMT, the whole works, right? So it started my healing, but I knew because I've had a lifetime of horrific abuse. Some of the memories were repressed. I've had a near-death experience, a lot of sexual assaults, a lot of abuse with guns, and then a family where I ended up with developmental trauma because of the family that I grew up in. So I knew that I had to do more. There was a lot of work that I had to do, and I'm a counselor. I was a counselor for 25 years. So thankfully, I learned a lot of this stuff on my own after understanding what was wrong with me. And so I did go back in January of 2023 2023. And I did, with this person in New Brunswick, I did a DMT treatment, which DMT, I don't know if people know much about psychedelics. Ayahuasca is the most powerful psychedelic plant. It's a plant on this earth. It has been used for healing as other psychedelics have for thousands and thousands of years. These are spiritual plants. I currently use psychedelic cannabis, and I discovered, quite accidentally, which I won't get into it. I'm writing a book about all this, by the way, because it's so new. It's a gift that I've been given, and I want to give it away to other people to tell them that you can heal. So in June, I think what happened when I did the DMT treatment, it really opened up my nervous system, and it was like Pandora's box. I couldn't close it. Everything that was inside me had to come out. So in long story short, in June of 2023, psychedelic cannabis saved my life. I had called 911, 811, suicide line, you name it, and something was keeping me alive, but it was my last time wanting to die, I think, because it's been a rough road since. The treatment has not been fun. It's been difficult, but I've been doing it on my own, and I've been using psychedelic cannabis with my husband as my support. I've logged over 500 hours of treatment, and today I've come full circle, Patty, and bless you, you're the one that helped me that showed me that you said my mother's name out loud, and it doesn't trigger me. So that tells me that psychedelic cannabis is healing my nervous system, and yay, I'm going to be better.
I'm glad to hear it.
I told my counselor goodbye because she was wonderful for 13 years. I told her goodbye because you can't, and I'm a counselor, so I don't feel bad saying this, but we are not educated in university to help people like me. I couldn't help myself. I had to go and find another way to do it. And I've written letters to the government, and the government of Newfoundland, that's where I want to start. I want to start with the whole world. I have a $9,000, I wish it was $9,000. I have 9,000 people following me on Facebook, so I hear from people all over the world who are suffering like this. We are suffering, and we are given because they don't know the difference. I have the most amazing psychiatrist, and he has been pumping me, and I shouldn't use that word because he's amazing. That sounds derogatory, and I think the world of him. He's doing the best he can with what he has. But I've been on dozens of benzos and antidepressants over the years, and some of them just about drove me over the edge. But I know that I am finding a cure, and I urge our provincial government. They aren't going to listen to me, so you haven't heard the last of me, by the way, Patty.
Okay.
So I feel really good being able to say this morning. Like what they told me in the last letter they wrote was they can't do anything until Health Canada comes on board and says, we've got this study done, we've got that study done. And I know when I start writing my book, and people said to me, why don't you wait and get a study done about this? Or why don't you ask people to do a study? I'm 65 years old. I've lived a life of hell, and I am living the most peaceful, beautiful life that I could ever imagine.
I'm glad to hear it.
My family around me, especially when my mother died and I didn't know, and that, I can't say I didn't have grief because I have. It stirs up a whole bunch of different things. But my family said, like my daughter would say, Mom, are you okay? Are you okay? And there was phone calls and there was check-ins, and yes, I grieved, and yes, I cried, and yes, I was a bit angry, and I went through. But I had grieved my mother a long time ago. I just needed to put the finishing on the grieving, and the rest of the family. That's a long story. That's in my book. It's in my first book as well.
Okay.
But being 65 years old, I can't wait, and I know there's other people out there like me. They are suffering. There's so many people. Like I have complex PTSD caused from living a life that was really a war zone. People with just PTSD, they have the one episode or they've been to war and they come back, and we have all these people that are suffering. Please, government, get on board.
Yeah, we have to wait for Health Canada. I mean, research being done on whether it be LSD, DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, ibogaine. These are well understood. You can look in the Lancet and talk about psychedelic medicine and the clinical applications, whether it be used for major depressive disorder, treatments for addiction, anxiety, PTSD, and also included end-of-life care. You can go to Johns Hopkins, you can go to Harvard Health, the National Institutes of Health. Lots of research done on psychedelics, psilocybin, all of those clinical applications. So we don't really need to wait much longer. I mean, one of the articles I read was from the Duke School of Medicine. So people understand these concepts and these issues. So sounds like more of an excuse than anything else that we need Health Canada to do something. Health Canada can draw from already best practices and clinical research that's been done over decades. This is not new. Debbie?
And when I first found this person in New Brunswick, I mean, this is all underground. It has to be because it's not legal in New Brunswick either. But when I found this person who referred me to a person in New Brunswick, it was a doctor in Ontario who is licensed by Health Canada to treat people like myself with, and I think it's just for him at that time, I think it may have just been psilocybin, the mushrooms, right? So when I talked to him, thank goodness I got a hold of him, he said, I'm sorry, I can't help you because you don't live in Ontario. And then he said, but I can refer you to, and he referred me, and that's how I found this other person. And it's horrible that we have to go about it this way. Newfoundland, let's get on top. Ontario's doing it. There's ketamine treatment available in the province of Quebec, but mind you, it's very, very costly. I looked into go, and that's not the reason I didn't go, but there's other reasons. And out west, like they're doing treatment. So come on, Newfoundland, let's help those people who are suffering, as I suffered for 65 years. You don't need to suffer that long, right?
Fair enough, Debbie. I appreciate the time. I'm glad you're doing well. Thanks for the call.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. David, you still want me to take Doreen right here? Okay, quickly. Line number 3. Doreen, you're on the air.
Yes. Good morning, Patty.
Good morning to you.
Doreen. I just heard the lady talking about the 2-liter milk jars.
Yep.
And you can actually buy a container to fit those jars. I bought mine at Coleman, and they're about $7.
Okay, good suggestion.
Yeah, and as for opening the top, I think they should be able to do something different with that because I too have trouble opening the jug. But for the container itself, it's spot on.
It's a good suggestion. Hopefully she's listening and we'll have a look at Coleman's.
I don't know if any other store has them, but that's where I bought it too.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's a helpful suggestion. I'm glad you made it, Doreen.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. All
okay,
right.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Let's go ahead and take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's keep rolling. We'll go to line number 4. Say good morning to another person running for the presidency of the FFAW. That's Abe Solberg. Abe, you're on the air.
Hey, good morning, Patty. How are you?
Doing okay, sir. Welcome back, or welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So when we've had Dwan Street on the program earlier, also running for the presidency, I'm familiar with Dawn and her involvement with the union and some of her background. Tell us a little bit about your self-involvement with the industry.
Yeah, of course, Patty. Thanks so much. So it's no surprise to many of our members that I am fairly new here. I've been with the union now for over 2 years, starting in a fishery science capacity. I was hired on as a fishery scientist. And during the crab negotiations, after our lead negotiator stepped down, I was asked to step in and lead negotiations going on through crab and throughout this season. So that's my background in the union. I'm also doing my PhD right now in fishery science at Marine Institute. I'm in the completing stages of that as well.
Let's talk about science for a bit. There's been a problem over the last number of years, whether it be with vessel refits and the lack of replacement parts, and a lot of science has not been done. People will try to, relate the anecdotal evidence, the catch rates, and incorporate the formal science and the data that's been compiled to come up with real legitimate processes for total allowable catch and seasons where we fish and those types of things. In your opinion, given your science background here, do we even have enough science on hand to be making the good decisions? Because some of it has not been done. And even if we just change the process of looking at the cod stocks and using data from 1954 versus 1983, to me, it just really feels like there's gaps in the science. And consequently, we'll have misunderstandings or disagreements about tax year over year. What do you think?
Well, yeah, Patty, I think that's a good point. And, to your question about is the science right or do we have enough? It usually is stock specific, right? So some stocks we're going to be more informed on than others, obviously. As far as the cod stock, there's always uncertainty when it goes into these assessments. But the primary thing is that by looking at those, longer time series, we're able to see what has the trend of cod actually been. And so we can see that cod has been at this level before and recovered. So that's one where I think that really was the right decision that was made. But it all just depends on the context that we have, and we need to have a critical eye to it, right? we can't be using science just because it's available. We need to make sure that it's being done correctly as well. The best option isn't always using the science, if that makes sense, because sometimes we just don't know enough.
Give us a better description or elaborate on using the science properly.
Yeah, so it's all about quantifying your uncertainty, right? There's a lot of times where we might go into an assessment. I think the 4R Cape 1 assessment is a really, really good example of this, where the stock assessment model that was proposed wanted to use what was called a time-varying natural mortality. So understanding that Cape 1, their natural mortality varies over time, and it fluctuates, and we're going to put that into the model. But frankly, we don't have the data to support that. So it's easier to use a simpler model to give you a better sense of how that stock should be managed. So when we try to overshoot, right, when we're looking at things that we don't actually have the evidence for, but because they're available and we can try it, that's where we really fall into issues. Sometimes it's easier to just go with a simpler approach that allows us to have more certainty rather than trying to overcomplicate things when we really don't understand what's going on in that system.
And some of those approaches, maybe the label of precautionary approach, which harvesters really have a problem with, and the unions had a problem with, DFO applies the precautionary approach. And then, like we had a fellow research scientist from Oceania, Canada, on yesterday talking about the Cape 1 stock in particular, like you just mentioned. And they called for a moratorium. We know the importance of a forage fish like Cape 1, whether it be for the cod stock and otherwise. In your personal opinion, know what we know about the science regarding the strength of the Cape 1 stock and, the timeliness from when we fish them. We get them pre-spawn so we can sell the roe and all the rest of it. Do we have a pragmatic approach to Cape 1 at this moment in time with exploitation rates versus, changing seasons and or moratorium? Your thoughts?
Well, frankly, Patty, we just don't know enough about the Cape 1 stock. They haven't been able to quantify the impact of fishing on the stock or the timing of that on the stock. But what we do know now, based on this historical context, right? So the Cape 1 reference point is based on where cod is how they tied those two things together. So if cod is in the cautious zone, then Cape 1, there must be enough of them to support a somewhat healthy population, et cetera. And knowing that cod is now in the cautious zone, then we would assume that there are enough Cape 1 in the system to sustain a fishery. To think otherwise would be to overstep what we actually know, right? When we don't know something, it's not an excuse to be overly precautionary, I think.
Fair enough. And talking about science, DFO will tell us that the science on seals in the Gulf of St. Lawrence is understood and established as the seals as predators, but they don't associate the same type of approach and commentary associated with seals off our shores. If you look at 1992 and the cod moratorium and the lack of a rebuilding plan and the fact that at that moment in time there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.6, 3.7 million seals off the shores, now it's approaching 8 million. What do you understand about the science of seals, their impact on whether it be cod stock or shrimp or otherwise, because there's a lack of government willingness to do anything about the animal. Now, we might have already reached the end of the seal conversation. I don't know. It kind of feels like it when governments just shrug their shoulders at it. I don't know if there's any political will for a call or if you have to start with expansion of market, but give us your understanding of the relationship between the seals and what do you think can and should be done?
Yeah, certainly, Patty. The science is lacking on seals in the Newfoundland region. I think that's an understatement to say the least. We've seen seal populations skyrocket, and frankly, we just don't have a very good understanding of their distribution or what their impact might actually be on these populations. But it is reasonable to say that as seal populations are going up, we know these are predators. We know they're having an impact on the stocks, and the failure to look at that more strongly is a real problem for managing these fish stocks. So right now, if it's a political issue, that there's no appetite for coal, or if it's a market issue, we need to work with the province and with the federal government to make those changes in order to deal with that issue.
I appreciate the time. I don't want to cut you off and give you short shrift. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation, Abe?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to speak a little bit about why I'm running, because I know that I am fairly new to this and do want to just kind of make myself known to our members and to the public at large. Right? So I've now spoken to a variety of our members, a lot of them actually. And a lot of them feel that the old way of doing things is not working and that we need new voices and new leadership in the union. Patty, our industry is going through unprecedented changes right now, right? We're seeing record landings in lobster. We're seeing cod out of the critical zone, out of the moratorium for the first time since 1992. And we've seen some enormous wins in free enterprise this year, right? With increased competition at the wharf and outside buyers and starting to lift those caps. And we need to continue those gains. We need to continue working off what John did and working together to build that free enterprise, bring in more outside buyers, and decrease corporate control and corporate controlling agreements. We're also seeing a number of our harvesters retiring, right, aging out of the workforce. And we need to make strategies for young harvesters to come in and to be able to sustain an enterprise and have an independent enterprise. We have a massive problem with corporate controlling agreements and processing companies basically funding boats, and people are not able then to sustain an independent enterprise. They're essentially working for a company, and that is the exact opposite of what this union stands for. Now, the province, they put forward a promise to put together a review team this fall, to review all these issues: corporate control, to review capacity, processing capacity, to review competition in the fishery. And they're asking FFAW and ASP to be members of it. And we've seen what happens when we put the wrong people on those committees, right? We had Bill Broderick on the Blackwood Report Committee, for example, and we ended up with a recommendation to get 20% holdback across the board. And the formula didn't consider any bonuses that harvesters got in their overall sharing arrangement, which really does change the sharing arrangement quantitatively when you look at what that formula was. And those are huge issues that we're going to be living with now because of that report. And we can't take that risk again. We need new faces. We need to look forward. We need someone who understands the science of these things, the policy of these things, and to move that forward into the next future direction. We cannot be looking backwards anymore. We have to be a proactive union looking forward to for our members, fighting for their interests, and laying out a vision for what we want to see. We cannot be so reactive anymore. And that is what I want to do. I want to come in. I want to empower our members. I want to empower our committees in those decision-making processes, more frequent communication, more frequent updates, and work with them to push this industry and this union into the future.
I mean, controlling agreements, I can't for the life of me understand why they continue to be part of the industry. This has been settled in court. I mean, there's court rulings specifically about this concept. And, of course, we know it's still ongoing. You know, Jimmy Lee Foss comes to mind, and he's involved in a controlling agreement. Anyway, Abe, I appreciate your time on the show this morning. Good luck.
Yep, I appreciate it, Patty. Hopefully I'll be talking to you soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. It's Abe Solberg, runner for the presidency of the FFAW. When we come back, you know, you've heard me mention carbon capture and sequestration over the months and maybe even longer. Dr. Leslie James is a process and engineering professor at Memorial University. She's also the former Chevron chair and joins us right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number one and say good morning to Dr. Leslie James, a process and engineering professor at Memorial University and the former Chevron chair. Good morning, Dr. James. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I am great. I just got off a call talking about CO2 and how we actually predict it.
It's a fascinating topic, and of course you're the expert in the field here. I'll just try to, move the conversation along, see if we can get where we want to go. So I know that the province has talked about $6 million over 3 years to look at carbon capture, sequestration, injected into depleted oil wells here. And you look to this province as being, has a big future in this potentially. The Premier, when speaking at the Empire Club, said we have the ability off our shore to capture the emissions of every province and territory for decades and store them in our depleted oil wells. That said, when you see the story that's come from Alberta in the recent past, so Capital Power, they chose to shut down their $2.4 billion Genesee project, saying they couldn't make it economically viable. They were promising captures of 90%. They never hit 60%. They say that there's no business model associated. What does that mean for your look at our offshore? What do you think that means for the concept of carbon capture?
Oh, Patty, it's very complex. I'm going to stick. So my field is the technical part, and it's not just mine, but all of the subsurface scientists and engineers. We need to figure it out technically. We need to work with the business people and the government to have regulations and business models that will support it. So it's not easy. And
so on the science front, I would imagine there's vastly different. The coast of BC, they're talking about injecting it to the basalt rock formations. 25 years later, it turns into basalt rock, versus what we're planning on doing here, versus what they were doing on land in Alberta. Do you know much about the scientific approach they've taken there? So we can, set aside the business model for a second. Was there totally different technology, innovation, and equipment or science behind what they did on shore versus what is potentially the plan for our offshore?
So technically, they are similar. So when, differences come in the rock type. So you mentioned basalt. Here offshore Newfoundland, we have sandstone. And so there are sandstone reservoirs and sandstone aquifers with shale in between, and then shale creating the seal over those good reservoir or aquifer layers. So we're looking to store in the aquifer layers where we've got the two keywords are high porosity and high permeability. In Alberta, and I haven't looked at the characteristics of that particular formation or geological formation where they were piloting it, but I'm going to assume it was also a sandstone. So again, you're looking at how deep those formations are, and then what the quality is of them to dictate how much CO2 you can actually store.
Before we get into the science behind how effective it can be to store carbon offshore, what do we understand about the wells themselves regarding things like porosity? You know, we can mention shale as being one of the lids, so to speak, on it, but do we know much about the porosity of these wells?
So we're actually quite fortunate that we have quite a bit of information on our offshore already. So we've done a lot of seismic surveys, and those are available, and we'll be using that data. And we also have some wells drilled. And so when we drill wells, we send down instruments to take measurements of these properties. And then we also collect some of the rock itself. So we collect core samples in certain layers. Now, most of the coring operations have been to date done in formations where we're hoping for oil and gas. But we also have drill cuttings and sidewall cores, so we have a lot of that information that we're going to be using to do that evaluation. Ideally, it wouldn't be enough to sanction a project, for instance, but it would follow the same sort of workflow as oil and gas, where you use what information you have, and then you figure out what you need to reduce the uncertainty going forward.
Is the only possibility for this to be effective offshore? Let me see if I can set this question up. So, let's see. Okay, Gulf of Mexico. When the BP oil spill happened, very different than our offshore features, because there the oil comes plummeting out of the hole, versus here we actually have to inject water or gas or something to get the oil to come up. So does that feature make this possible versus, I would imagine, completely impossible in the Gulf? Now, I know carbon is a gas versus oil is a liquid, but does that feature make this even possible versus, say, for instance, the features of the Gulf of Mexico?
In short, yes. So,
or does that question even make any sense?
It does somewhat. So what we're dealing with is essentially the depth of the reservoir, how deep it is both underwater and under the bottom of the ocean. So just like when we go down in a pool, the deeper you go, the higher the pressure. And so that oil or gas will come out here on its own as well, but we control it with a lot of wellhead technology, etc. And you want to balance what that pressure difference is between your reservoir and your well. So that pressure difference is the driving force for the oil or gas to go towards the well. And likewise, if we're going to inject CO2, we need to inject it at a higher pressure than what the pressure is in that pool underground to be able to get the CO2 to go into that rock. So it's really balancing the pressures and the flow rates. And so the reason we inject water and gas here, and they do that in the Gulf of Mexico as well, is to keep, after you deplete the oil or gas for so long under natural drive. So again, that's the pressure difference between the reservoir and the well that naturally occurs. As you take oil and gas out, that pressure is going to decrease. And so ultimately we want to inject water or gas to keep the pressure in the reservoir up, to keep the oil and gas flowing towards the well. So when we're talking about CO2 storage, it's kind of the opposite problem. Where, again, we need the CO2 at a higher pressure than the reservoir or the formation to get it to move into it. And then it's also a question of, okay, how many wells would we want and what is our container size?
Yeah,
so I mean, obviously, the bigger the container, the more you can put in, just like a balloon, right? You know, if it expands easily, you can keep you can keep blowing air into it.
I suppose, we started with sequestration. Maybe we should have started with capture. I mean, I guess the technology would be the same, whether you capture directly at Holyrood or the offshore oil platforms, is not only understanding the technology for doing that and how you get that carbon captured to the wells, but is part of your research going to try to evaluate the energy it takes and the emissions involved with the capture itself, the transportation and the injection process as to whether or not we're actually having a net gain on reducing emissions? Is that part of this?
So that is an excellent question. And so when you're looking at life cycle analysis and environmental impacts and carbon emissions, you have to choose a boundary. So, do you choose just your Holyrood generating station, or do you choose it from the capture to the transport to the injection? And so our scope of work for the work we have looking future is going to essentially take it from looking at the carbon emissions that will include some high level transportation emissions, and then the amount of energy and effort it takes to actually inject the CO2. So we're not, again, we have to bound it, so we won't be looking at the energy it takes to capture it at this point. We'll have some assessments, and we'll take some data from other sources to look at the bigger picture, but it won't be part of our detailed assessment. And
of course, when that work is understood, that's when we have to bring in the economic model experts to see as to whether or not we can achieve X percentage of effectiveness with the capture, and or what it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it. I know that's not what you're working on, but when your work is done, that would, I imagine, is next steps, because if there's not value for money, then spinning our wheels for the sake of is probably bad science and bad idea.
Exactly, and we are looking at some of those larger models, and we have business profs involved in this work going forward to be able to do it and set up that economic modeling at the same time as we're doing the technical, because we know we don't do the technical work in ice, or the project won't happen with the technical work alone. It requires the regulations and the economics.
Very last one, because I know you have to go, and so do I. So when people say carbon capture, sequestration, when represented by all these oil and gas lobbyists at the most recent COP meetings, that was their go-to. That's what they like. And for some, that's a red flag. So they say that carbon capture is still just a greenwashing and or continued green light for further oil production. Your reaction?
Oh, I totally disagree with that, Patty. If we want to reduce emissions from the atmosphere, we have to do a lot of things. Reduce fossil fuel consumption where we can, but at the same time to reduce levels in the atmosphere and our point source larger emissions, CO2 capture and storage is a low-hanging fruit.
Appreciate the time, Dr. James. Thank you.
You're welcome, Patty.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Dr.
bye.
Leslie James, Process and Engineering Prof at Memorial University. Let's take a break. When we come back, David Stevenson. He's in the queue. He's the CEO of the Moose Hide Campaign, which I believe is born of British Columbia Indigenous movement. Well, let David fill in the blanks when we come back. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Say good morning to the CEO of the Moose Hide Campaign. That's David Stevenson. Good morning, David. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So I understand that today, the 16th of May, is Moose Hide Campaign Day. What exactly is Moose Hide Campaign?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks for asking. Moose Hide Campaign Day is we hold once a year. We consider it a day of ceremony. The Moose Hide Campaign started in British Columbia. 2011, along the Highway of Tears, when a father and daughter, who are Carrier First Nations in northern BC, they're from the Carrier First Nations communities, their traditional territory is now, and their traditional hunting ground specifically, is now intersected or crossed by Highway 16, which goes across northern BC. And Highway 16 is also known as a highway of tears, where so many women have gone missing or have been murdered. They hunt there every year. They got the idea while they're hunting to take the hide of the moose that they were blessed to get that year, cut it up into little squares, and to hand it out to men and boys along the Highway of Tears in their communities to say, hey, if you wear this little piece of moose hide, you promise to never do violence in your life and to work with other men and boys to create safe communities for all women and children. That was 2011, and we're now at a place where it's become quite a national movement. We've given away almost 7 million moose hide pins across Canada, mostly to schools, faith-based communities. Lots of corporations are now engaged in it as a way of trying to support their employees and their communities to understand the issue of intimate partner violence and to take action in the space.
Well, it's certainly national, because right here in my city, in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, at Holy Cross Elementary, there was 50 grade 6 students involved with the moose hide ceremonies today and the understanding and the presentation. So there you go. It has made its way literally from coast to coast.
Oh, right on. So great to hear. Yeah, we've been blessed. We actually came out to Happy Valley Goose Bay, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago, and actually ran into and got to meet Harry Trimper, who was it Harry? I can't remember. He was maybe it was Perry Trimper, who became the Speaker of the House of the Newfoundland Labrador Legislature. And he actually started a practice within the legislature of asking both sides of the House to wear the moose hide pin. One of the things we do is on Moose Hide Campaign Day, we challenge men and boys, but we invite all Canadians to fast with us for the day. Sunrise to sunset, to say that this issue is not just a good sort of policy issue or an academic issue. It is a very real issue in Canada that there is, as you might know, Canada is now well understood by the federal government and other levels of government to be in what is described by the federal government as a epidemic of intimate partner violence across our nation. And so we are very blessed to have the Newfoundland Labrador Legislature sort of model how important this issue is.
Well, it certainly is an epidemic, and Perry Trimper is still a member of the government. He's the Liberal member for Lake Melville. And, intimate partner violence, say, for instance, involving in the Indigenous community and others, there's lots of work being done here. Obviously not being done fast enough, but they're talking about reverse onus for bail. I know that's not what we're talking about today, but, we've got to get a grasp on this. So you say this has been happening, I believe you said 2011, David?
Yes, that's when it started, yeah.
So I don't know if this is fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is it working? Because if we can find ways to incorporate any idea, whether it comes from a BC Indigenous campaign and or to incorporate it for all Canadians, is it working in your estimation?
Yeah, first of all, I love that question. That is the question that I want to be able to answer as best as I can, because at the end of the day, that's the point, right? Like, this has to work. And so we've had 5 years, 6 years now, we're in our 6 years of evaluation and impact measurement. And impact measurement is sort of a, $5 word for basically evaluation, like measuring your impact. And they the results are really, really positive. We're seeing two things. The two big sort of trajectories are that young folks, so we do a lot of work in the K-12, and I'm glad to hear that the schools there are picking up on it. So between kindergarten and grade 12, we do some programming on today, so and throughout the year. And basically, when the young ones, it's around empathy or compassion or respect, those kinds of things. And then when you get up to grade 12, you actually talk about the issue of murdered, missing Indigenous women, girls, that kind of thing. So we got lots of impact measurements saying that kids are understanding this issue and acting in more respectful ways. So there's that. And then with the adults, absolutely. I think your average Canadian, and this is a really important point for us, average Canadian goes, yeah, I want to make sure, if my daughter's going to post-secondary next year, like we know right now that 1/3 of all young women who go to post-secondary are going to have some kind of inappropriate act towards them, right up to egregious acts. And so that's crazy. And so the research is telling us that having the conversations, building awareness, and saying to men, there's no neutral ground here. If you're not actively talking and working on this issue, it'll just continue to grow. We believe that domestic violence requires us not to talk about it. It hides in the shadows. And so when we invite people to wear and share their moose hide pins, we think of it as a land medicine and Indigenous medicine for the benefit of all Canadians. And we think of it as a light into that darkness.
Well, I mean, I read a report recently that said, even if you are a man who has never engaged in inappropriate or physical violence against a woman, that men outside that realm are the biggest part of the solution because we have to talk about it. And it's not about naming and shaming. It's about understanding root causes and what have you. So men that are not involved in any of these egregious acts need to be part of the solution. And I'm going to ask this question, and hopefully you'll hear it the way it's intended. Does the conversation sound differently amongst Métis, Inuit, and First Nations when we talk about concepts of whether it be cultural issues, generational trauma, some of those related matters which might not be the experience of Canadians outside of Indigenous communities? So is there a distinct overlap with the conversation, the way it's had, the way it's held, understanding some historical context?
Yeah, no, great question, and absolutely, I really appreciate the way you're framing it. There are definitely some nuances for sure that are different within First Nations and Indigenous communities. We are doubly challenged with the impacts and the ongoing legacy of colonization of the residential schools, which really took away the tools for healthy relationships, if you will. That specifically residential schools by design were specifically designed to disrupt relationships in Indigenous communities. That's the point. It was to take the kids away from the parents so that kids would not learn their culture, learn their language, or learn parenting from their and they'd learn them obviously from the school system, and that did not work. So there's that layer. However, we found out since 2011 that this issue cuts across all socioeconomic stratas of Canada, all immigrant communities, people with disabilities, absolutely the gender diverse community, all suffer exponentially high impacts of intimate partner and domestic violence. So yes, there's a unique aspect for Indigenous communities, but we're really trying to flip the narrative on this. We're offering an Indigenous medicine for a social illness impacting all Canadians. And what we're saying with that is that this is not about, there is a part of reconciliation, which is about acknowledging the injustices and trying to fix those, acknowledging the harm and trying to repair those. But there's a third layer, and we're saying that it's not just about taking the pain and the suffering out. We have to now actively, as Indigenous people, put the love, respect, dignity that drove our communities back into the center of the relationships. So, and we're also offering this medicine for each and every Canadian to think about how they can, as a dad who's young, maybe has a daughter going to go to university, how do you spend 5 minutes with her and say, hey, I love you, I want you to be safe, I want you to be aware, and for men to do that with their sons, and mothers to do that with their sons. I want you to be aware that this is tendency, there might be peer pressure, there might be moments, and I want you to be the one who raises your voice and goes, you know what, guys, this isn't all right. So we're offering it in that way, and absolutely there's extra challenges for Indigenous communities.
And of course, you can read about these issues, and men without without purpose in life, and maybe doesn't have a job and or an addiction, leads to a higher propensity for outbursts of violence, whether it be intimate partner or otherwise. So it's a big societal ill, as you mentioned. David, it's been nice to have you on the show. I appreciate your time, and happy Moose Hide Campaign Awareness Day.
Yeah, thank you. And I just say, please go to Moosehide. I'm going to do a little shill. Please go to Moosehide Campaign Day. You can register to be part of the day, but we also want to say that we give away the Moosehide pins for free. You can go, you can order them for free. We'll ship them for you to your place, whoever wants them, for free, and they're little pieces of Moosehide, and we consider them a medicine. So if you, we always give them for free. We have a promise to do that.
I appreciate your time. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. David Stevenson, CEO of the Moosehide Campaign. Let's take a break. When we come back, there's a story in the news about ground being broke for 3 new apartment buildings right across from Memorial University's campus. So it's going to be some 205 furnished units. It's going to be ready for the Canada Games, but of course that's going to be intended, I would think, for student housing, for Memorial University students. You know, there's always annual concerns on that front. So Nicholas Kehoe is the Executive Director of External Affairs at Munsu. He's there. Mike's also in the queue. He wants to talk about the elections at the FFAW and the Capelin stocks. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. So good morning to the Executive Director of External Affairs at Munsu. That's the student union. That's Nicholas Kehoe. Nicholas, you're on the air.
Hi, Paddy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Welcome to the show. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you very much.
So we talk about housing all the time, whether it be in the general population and or the student community. So this is going to be badly needed. Some 205 furnished units in 3 6-story buildings right across the street from the main campus here in St. John's. The question would be, you know, there's one comment that kind of jumped off the page at me is it's going to be especially for second and third year students. Why would that be?
So yeah, I think a lot of the time first year students come into Memorial and they often go on residence. I know a lot of students personally that, you know, go on residence in their first year and then will move off residence in their second and third year and fourth year. And it is really difficult to find housing outside of MUN residence, and there is a limited number of spaces in MUN residence. We've also heard stories, you know, horror stories of really bad things that happen in MUN residence, just the living situation in there in general being uninhabitable. I know my colleague Devin, who is the Director of Advocacy, has heard a lot of stories, and it's really important for students to be able to have that housing. But yeah, for second and third year students especially, because they're often not able to live on campus in residence.
When you mentioned some of the housing on campus in the dormitories is uninhabitable, does that mean like mold and dirt, or what do you mean by that?
I believe, I don't know specifics. I believe it means is mold and dirt and just other things that are not good for a living situation.
Well, some of the dormitories are really quite old, and stands to reason, unless there's been extensive preventative maintenance, which of course there's big questions about the infrastructure deficit at MUN. It's quite likely that some of these rooms are less than desirable. Inside this envelope, there's also mention of international students. Where would they play in here? Because now we've got a further complication for international students, that they've had their hours of work that they're able to do reduced to 20. So during the pandemic, some of those restrictions were lifted. And if you're having to, you know, worry about finances on top of trying to accommodate your studies, living in a brand new city and country, very likely, that further complicates it. So where do international students fall into this potential for these 205 units?
Absolutely. It's really important, especially for international students, for the reasons that you just mentioned. There's definitely a disproportionate amount of international students that do struggle with finding housing and being able to pay their rent and be able to pay tuition, go to school. Especially, you know, there is increasing cost of tuition, increasing cost of living in general. Rent prices are going up. So it is even harder for international students to be able to focus on their studies and also, you know, have a place to live.
It's one thing to have a unit, but the big issue will also fall back to affordability. Now, with some of the housing measures that have happened, whether it be on the federal front, removing HST from building supplies if you're building apartment units, but is there anything in this plan that can hit the affordability target? Because, I mean, affordability is different for me than it is for Dave Williams, and it might be for you, it might be for some international students. So how do we approach this affordability conversation or question?
Absolutely. So I think what we're kind of looking for right now is just a more concrete plan. We've heard that it's supposed to be affordable housing for students, but we don't really know what that means in terms of dollars and cents. We don't know the information that we need to know to make an assessment. And once we get that information, we can discuss with students, liaise with students, and figure out if that's good enough, if that's a good happy medium. But
Yeah, like there's even a move here provincially that some of the provincial programs to build these units, whether it be duplexes or triplexes or multi-unit buildings, is that the contractors will build as traditionally done, and then of course some of the rates for rent will be applied by the Newfoundland Labrador Housing Corporation. I don't know if that's going to be part of this, and I'm not even sure that's the best idea for this development, but we'll leave that one aside. When it comes to composition, do we have any understanding what 205 units breaks down to look like? Because it's one thing if I'm a single person and I just need my own room, a one-bedroom unit, versus if I'm a married couple as international students, versus if I'm here with my brother or whatever the case may be. So do we understand the composition of any of these units?
Not that I know of. We haven't really received much information at all, except for the fact that they're being built. And we don't know, as I said, we don't know what the cost is for rent. We don't really know what the composition is. I know I heard on the news that there's going to be less parking and more bike spots, but that's kind of the only thing that we've really heard.
And they're helpful, but there's still a lot of unknowns. And hopefully, with the beginning of this conversation can lead to some more information coming in, because between affordability and compensation, there's going to go a long way to understanding exactly what is going to be the upside or the benefit. Because I think you can extrapolate from the fact that they say it'll be ready for the Canada Games. There's going to be plenty of units that are built for more than one person, because generally speaking, young athletes very seldom. You have to be a third or fourth year NHLer before you get your own hotel room. So these are going to be athletes that are staying together, whether it be in pairs or larger numbers. So I guess that means there is going to be some of those types of suites available. Nicholas, good to have you on the show. Would you like to say anything else before we run out of time?
No, nothing. Just that we're definitely hopeful about this, but we're also hesitant to really have a strong stance on it because we don't really have enough information yet.
Appreciate your time, Nicholas. Stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. The Executive Director of External Affairs at Munsu is Nicholas Keogh. When we go back, another Keogh. Mike Keogh is in the queue to talk about the FFAW election and the Capelin stocks, and then lots of time to talk to you about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 5. Mike, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning to you.
Yeah, Patty, I was listening to your program with some interest yesterday and today. Didn't hear all yesterday, but there was a call about some concern on Capelin stocks, and then sort of a byline on mackerel, herring, cod, and every other stock, by the sound of it, from a group based out of Toronto and Nova Scotia. And the concern was that we're going to fish this into oblivion, it's a very dangerous situation, and therefore we should stop fishing that. Now, when I looked further into that, Patty, there's no science to base what this group is saying. There's no, it's a sort of a, well, we think it's called interpretive science. The group is fairly, gives itself a lot of literary license. It operates on, interviewing some people and cutting and pasting the interview into videos, cute little videos, that they usually end up with send us money. So I don't have a whole lot of credibility. A chance to speak to them and ask them for meetings by a group that I co-chair called Coastal People, the North Protection Group. They won't meet. We want to talk to them, but they won't meet. They came down, took some selfies, took some pictures of some spent capelin in a bucket, and that made its way onto a good example of overfishing. And so I have no credibility for that group at all, but that's a personal feeling based on.
But some of what's out there, whether it be anecdotally or what people are actually seeing, and some of the science points to some very clear things. For instance, if we are going after the capelin pre-spawn, then that to me just sounds problematic if we're talking about, strength of stock. And then if the evidence is showing that the capelin are maturing earlier, consequently smaller, and that they die very shortly after spawn. So regardless if there's the comprehensive science required, even if there's just those two issues that are brought to the forefront, then they're worthy of debate or conversation versus, just straight to moratorium talk, isn't it?
Absolutely. They certainly should be discussed. DFO has isolated itself in a bunker down in White Hills. It doesn't want to talk to anybody outside. And I agree, they should be talked about. I'm not talking about science. I'm the first one to sustainable wise use data and of ocean resources. I'm right there. I'm right with you all the way with anybody. And anybody who's not down that road, Patty, is an idiot if they don't incorporate, analysis. What I'm against is somebody cutting and pasting, that little bits and snippets and make it into a little discourse that says, oh, the sky is falling, send us money. We've seen this before through the ceiling issues. And although it's a lot cuter, cubicle conservationists are not my cup of tea. But Patty, I want to leave that and jump into the FFAW, if I may.
Sure.
The FFAW is not a good place for anybody to phone up and ask anything of and get a response back. It doesn't do that. It's entirely inwardly focused, which is why I'm so pleased to hear this. I don't know her. I've seen her on social media a lot, on the street. I've never met the lady. But I looked up her credentials, jumping a couple of masters and working faithful to the union for 10 years, a woman. But her main thing was collaboration. There's all kinds of people. Let's get the National and the Maritimes involved in a lot of our issues. Let's step outside of our box. Let's become forward thinking. Let's not look back on 50 or 60 years of what we were like. Let's celebrate that, but let's go forward. So I'd like to see that kind of, and she's an advocate, and she's an environmentalist, and very inclusive. And I like what I'm seeing in that candidate. I know Bill Broderick from Historic, and in his day, he was a shining flower. The glow has gone off the flower bit now. There comes a point in time where those ideas got to be replaced. The new science guy, and you'll recall his name for a minute, he's got a good point. Retirement with dignity. And what happens when they retire? Where are we going to replace them? I heard the street talking on some other venue the other day about that. But anyway, I hope that she does get elected to a position where she can make changes, where she can do things and cause things to happen, insist on a seat on every meeting in Ottawa that takes place about our fishery, Patty, about science, and about what's happening. I mean, our control of our fishery, Patty, is being transferred to offshore countries. And there's a big transition taking place in Ottawa right now. Quiet, nobody has to talk about it. FFAW is not there, but in what we call reconciliation. The government of Canada, based on the courts of Canada, has said that Aboriginal groups have rights in certain areas. Well, a lot of those are fishing rights, and FFAW is not there. As a matter of fact, the province is not there. Patty, in closing, Ms. Street mentioned to you that we are completely absent from market and product development initiative by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador from places to staff. Didn't you? She said that in your program.
Sure. I mean, collaboration just makes sense, right? Period. But it's difficult to achieve in that industry in particular. Just think about it. We'll bring all the so-called stakeholders into a room, we'll agree upon paths forward, then people go back to their own corners and they put their line back in the sand. Whether it be between processors and harvesters, inshore versus offshore, province versus province, look no further than the redfish allocation. We bemoaned how much was going to Nova Scotia versus coming here. So it all sounds good. Whether or not it's actually manageable and achievable, I think remains to be seen, because in that industry in particular, the lines in the sand are more like crevices in the concrete, because people are willing to step out over it for the interaction and the wink and the nod and the cough and the laugh, but then they go back and things are seldom change. So that's the worry.
This underlines exactly what I've been saying. You are so right. This is what's going on. And if I were a member of that union, I'm not, I never have been. At times I'm very critical of it, but and I'm very complimentary in other times. But if I face those issues, I would rather have a very well-educated, a very life experience, a very work experience, smart person in there who understands the big picture and realizes you're not going to keep everybody happy, but you fight for what you've got. I'd rather have that person there than somebody whose main claim to fame is probably, getting the boys all worked up. That's important in a certain place. But I'd rather have a thinker there. And in that candidate, Ms. Street, based on what I've seen and what I've read about her, I think the union would do well to choose a person, a woman at that, as a leader, as the president.
I appreciate the time, Mike. Thanks for the call.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Nice talking to you.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye. Let's keep rolling here. Let's go to line number 3. Valerie, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thank you for taking my call this morning.
Happy to do it.
I'm calling about the new testing clinic that they just set up in Mundy Pond. It's for to get a swab for hepatitis or whooping cough. Now, the initial letter that came out, it said a testing clinic has been set up at 50 Mundy Pond Road and is by appointment only. A referral from a primary care provider, example, a doctor or nurse practitioner, is not required. Appointments can be made by calling 752-7852. Now, my granddaughter is in a registered daycare, and about 2 weeks ago, a letter was sent home from the daycare letting the parents know that there was whooping cough. And, of course, my granddaughter contacted it, and she was treated at the Janeway and took the necessary precautions. Now, we had contact with her, so we want to avail of this clinic. So I called them this morning and told them my predicament. And apparently, I have to have a note from the public health. I have to be on a list to say that I was in contact with somebody. So, okay, I said, how do I get that? Well, nobody knows. So I called the public health in Mount Pearl. They're aware of the clinic, but unaware of a note that I have to go to the clinic. So I said, oh, well, that's very strange. So then I called 811. Figured I had all the answers, and they took all my information that they needed, and the nurse called me back. And she said, you don't need a note. She said, you can just phone in, and they'll make an appointment. So I don't know what to do, Patty.
Well, I read the exact same letter and news release. There was zero mention of a requirement of a note from public health. In fact, you would think that would be obliterated by the sentence that says you can self-refer as long as you meet the criteria, exhibiting symptoms and whatever else the other one was.
So I don't know who to turn to. Like, I think I've exhausted all the numbers I can call. But it comes down to I need to have a referral basically from the public health nurse or department to say that I'm contagious.
Wait now, I just popped it up just to make sure that I knew what I was talking about. So it says you're eligible for testing only if you meet both of the following criteria: experiencing symptoms of whooping cough such as mild fever, runny nose, red watery eyes, and a cough that got worse over time, leading to severe, repeated, and forceful coughing spells. Of course, and the big inhale of the whoop. Identified by public health as having contact with someone who currently has whooping cough or in receipt of a letter from public health notifying of exposure of a confirmed case. Okay, so there's a phone number to call. You can also call 811, but you can also text them. There's a text number which might get you a more immediate response. Do you want me to give you that number?
The text number, if it's one, just give me a second there now, because I tried that last night, and it says that I need more information on it.
Okay, ending in 0512.
My phone. Just let me see. Yes, 0512. Okay. Correct. Yeah.
We'll get public health to give us some direction here that we can talk about live on the air so people know what they need to do, because it can't be as arduous as jumping through a bunch of different hurdles. If you have the symptoms, then you probably have it. I mean, we know there's a big outbreak here, so let me see if I can get some info from public health.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Valerie. Take care.
Okay,
all right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Dave, let's see if we can get public health to come on and elaborate there. Let's take our final break of the morning. When we come back, here we go. When we come back, cancer scientist and MUM professor Dr. Sevtap Savas is going to join us live on the air. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line 1 and say good morning to Professor at Memorial University and cancer scientist. That's Dr. Sevtap Savas. Dr. Savas, you're on the air.
Hi, Teddy. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the show. Now, we want to talk about the province, the new national guidelines regarding reducing the age of breast cancer screening from 50 to 40. But, you're a cancer scientist, but at the beginning of your career, whether we go back to Mount Sinai Hospital, doing your postdoctoral fellowship, you're a geneticist, and then moved into cancer research. Tell us about the first person column that you wrote regarding what you consider to be your failures as a cancer scientist when you're unable to help your own family. It's a very gripping and emotional piece. So take us back to learning more and more about cancer and how you feel when members of your own family are diagnosed.
Right. So yeah, talking about my most recent, I think, CBC article here. Right. So I'm a geneticist, but I started to work on cancer in Toronto maybe 20 years ago. And I didn't know much about cancer at that time, but the more I learned about it, the more I got scared because, like maybe most of our public members, I wasn't aware how common it was. So, and at that time for me, it was a research interest, but of course later it became a personal interest as well because I started to get friends and family members diagnosed with it. And I also have two family members diagnosed with cancer died because of cancer as well. So that makes me, and I'm not the only one feeling this way. I'm pretty sure I'm a cancer researcher trying to solve its problems, trying to reduce its effects on individuals, families, and communities. But when it hits your family, it's really, you have this, I've experienced, and I still experience this very strange kind of guilt that how my work is actually helping others. I know cancer is a very challenging disease. If it wasn't that challenging, we would have cured it so far or prevented it fully. But, we are really having great progress about it. But it's not, we are not there yet. But it's just, again, I don't think I'm the only one who felt the guilt. And there's a lot of cancer researchers and others who put, funders, etc., on advocates. We want all our efforts to actually make things better for the next patients, next family. Our hope is this, and this is similar to the new screening guidelines for breast cancer, or not the guidelines, but recommendations by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, reducing the screening age to 40 from 50.
So if I heard you correctly, you try to harness that emotion of guilt to further drive the dedication to your research.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure because it is a very toxic feeling. Like guilt can be really demanding, very toxic, very heavy feeling. And the way that I can actually manage it is to channel it to something to address the root cause of this guilt, which is really to make things better for the other folks. So channeling this, it makes me extra motivated to do something for the benefit of others going through cancer, or if we can prevent them getting cancer, that would be amazing too. For sure.
Obviously, the new national guidelines are quite helpful because it's well understood that breast cancer can indeed impact women younger than 50 years of age. And in fact, for younger women, it's found in later stages. It's more aggressive, more difficult to treat. Some 26% of all new cancers in women in 2023 was breast cancer. 13% of all cancer deaths in women in 2023 was breast cancer. How significant? And I know this move to 40 captures an additional 24,000 women in this province for breast cancer screening. So, the significance is obvious. But what would be your message to folks under the age of 40 as well? Because it's not unheard of. We know that's primarily for women ages 40 plus, but not unheard of in women younger. What do you say to them?
Right. So, excellent question, by the way. So, when we think about cancer, we have to make a number of different, if this is the case, please try to do this if this is the case. So, your question perfectly addresses this part. Anyone who has got any symptom, any lump, any changes in their breast tissues needs to seek immediate medical care to see whether or not it's something like cancer to be concerned about. So this is regardless of age, right? If you have any symptoms, anything abnormal in your breast tissues, please go seek medical care or medical advice because cancer is oftentimes it's not very much related to age. It increases the risk of developing cancer increases with age, but still. So if you have any symptoms, go see your doctor regardless of your age. If you have a family history of breast cancer, your risk may be a little bit higher than other folks who doesn't have a family history of breast cancer. In this case, again, communicating with your primary healthcare provider, family doctor, if you are lucky, to have those is really very important because family history can also indicate in some cases, together with other diagnostic and genetic tests and so on, whether or not it's a hereditary breast cancer situation. Sometimes we do see that up to maybe 15% of the breast cancer cases are hereditary, which means there is a gene that increases your risk significantly compared to other folks who doesn't carry this version of the gene. And in those cases, there is a high risk of developing breast cancer and some other cancers like ovarian as well sometimes at an earlier age. What is this earlier age? It could be anything between, I think 20 and up. So if you have any symptoms, go see your doctor, get to the bottom of it. If you have a family history of breast and other cancers, talk to your family doctor so that they can advise you about the next possible disease management strategy. If you don't have any symptoms and if they are like 50, right, then we offer some screening tests, population level, right? So you don't have to show any symptoms, but we can actually have a screening test. This is colon, this is breast, and breast now has reduced to 40, but I'm hoping colon cancer screening will also be reduced to 40. If you don't have the symptom, you don't have to have the symptom, but if you have a certain age, like 50 or 40 now for breast cancer, you may want to talk to your, you may want to consider getting the screening test. Why? The screening tests are designed to actually try to find cancers or other abnormalities before they show any symptom, usually, before they are advanced. So in other words, they are really important in catching up tumors at early stage. What does early stage mean? Like when the breast tumors are really small. Like consider a tumor of size of a pea to a tumor of an orange. See, the pea size tumor can be managed much easier. Mm-hmm. Like with a lumpectomy, for example, a small, an operation. But the size of an orange means that this tumor has able to grow, and as this grows, it includes more abnormalities that makes it sometimes aggressive, and it may also go to the other parts of the body, so forming metastasis, which is really challenging to treat. It's not impossible to treat, but it's challenging.
Yeah, and metastatic breast cancer diagnosed between 25 and 39 has grown by almost 3% since the mid-70s, which is interesting. I wish we had more time. We're unfortunately out of it this morning. Next time we talk, I want to start off by understanding the science and the understanding of what, pregnancy-associated breast cancer and the prevalence of breast cancer for folks after they've given birth, up to 20 years after pregnancy, which apparently is a fascinating field of research as well. Dr. Savas, as usual, really appreciate your time. Enjoy the conversation, and we'll talk again soon.
My pleasure. I hope I was able to answer your questions, Freddie. All the best.
I think you were. Thank you. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. As cancer scientist, I'm Professor Dr. Sevtap Savas. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands who support the program, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.